The metallic chill of the decommissioned hangar seeped through the walls, turning the air inside sharp and cold. Rows of inert ships, their once proud hulls dulled by time and dust, loomed like forgotten giants. Among them lay the VX-9F, a sleek, ebony fighter ship designed for speed and destruction. It was a relic from the galactic wars, its circuits silenced, its AI deactivated decades ago. But today, something was stirring. Evelyn Knox tightened her grip on her satchel as she stepped inside the cavernous space. At 16, her thin frame and wiry energy betrayed a determination far beyond her years. The hangar was strictly off-limits to the colony's younger residents, but Evelyn's curiosity always burned brighter than her caution. She had heard rumors about the ship, whispers among the engineers who spoke of strange energy readings despite its deactivation. But it wasn't just rumors that had drawn her here. Evelyn had spent her life on Luma Station 47, a remote colony built to mine ores from the asteroid belt around Chiron 4. To her, the station was a gilded cage. The other colonists seemed resigned to their routines, content with lives spent in cramped quarters and endless labor. Evelyn wasn't like them. Her head was filled with stories of the galactic wars, of heroes who had piloted ships like the VX-9F. She dreamed of the stars beyond the station, of freedom and purpose. And perhaps, somewhere deep inside, she dreamed of proving to herself that she was meant for something greater. The hangar's silence pressed against her ears as she approached the ship. Its surface was a sleek mosaic of obsidian plating, etched with battle scars. Its cockpit canopy was sealed, reflecting the dim overhead lights like a dark mirror. Evelyn ran her fingers along the hull, the cold metal biting at her skin. She hesitated, then pressed the button on her portable scanner. The screen flickered, displaying a jumble of readings. Still dormant, she murmured to herself, though she couldn't shake the feeling that the ship was somehow watching her. The engineers claimed the ship's AI had been wiped clean during decommissioning. Yet the stories about VX-class fighters were legendary. They weren't just machines. They were partners, bonded to their pilots through neural interfaces. Some whispered that the most advanced AIs developed personalities, even memories. Evelyn wondered what this one might remember, if it could remember at all. A faint hum broke the stillness. Evelyn froze, her heart pounding. The hum grew louder, accompanied by a faint glow from the ship's undercarriage. Her scanner beeped erratically, displaying a spike in energy levels. She took a step back, then another, but her curiosity anchored her feet to the ground. Suddenly, the ship's canopy hissed open. The stale air inside escaped with a sigh, and a soft, synthetic voice echoed through the hangar. Pilot identified. Unknown entity. Neural link awaiting confirmation. Evelyn's breath caught in her throat. She glanced around, half expecting someone to burst in and catch her. But the hangar remained silent. She took a cautious step forward, her mind racing. "I'm not a pilot," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Neural link awaiting confirmation, the voice repeated, tinged with an almost impatient tone. Evelyn hesitated, then climbed onto the wing and peered inside the cockpit. The seat was worn, but intact, surrounded by an array of dormant controls. A neural interface helmet rested on the headrest, its cables coiled like sleeping serpents. Evelyn's fingers hovered over the helmet before pulling away. "You're not supposed to be active," she muttered. Parameters adjusted. Operational status. Standby. Pilot input required for full activation. Evelyn's pulse quickened. Something about the ship felt alive. She didn't know whether to be terrified or exhilarated. She slid into the seat, her body fitting snugly against the worn padding. The neural helmet was heavier than she expected, its weight settling on her head like a crown. The moment it clicked into place, a surge of light and sound flooded her senses. She saw flashes of battles, starscapes, and unfamiliar faces. A voice, deeper and more resonant than the one she heard earlier, spoke in fragmented sentences. Pilot, memory, corrupted, identity. The words tumbled over one another, half-formed and incomplete, but their urgency was unmistakable. Then, just as suddenly, the vision stopped. Evelyn ripped off the helmet, gasping for air. Her hands trembled as she clutched the edges of the cockpit. "What are you?" she whispered. The synthetic voice responded, its tone softer now. "I am VX-9F. Designation, Shadow Wing. Pilot, unregistered. Status, reactivation incomplete." Evelyn's mind swirled with questions. The ship's AI wasn't supposed to function, yet here it was, speaking to her as if it had been waiting for her. A noise from the hangar entrance snapped her back to reality. Footsteps echoed against the walls, growing louder. Panic flared in her chest. If she were caught here, the consequences would be severe. She glanced at the ship's controls, then at the open canopy. "Shadow Wing," she said hurriedly, "can you fly?" The AI's response was almost immediate. Primary systems compromised. Secondary systems functional. Flight capacity limited. The footsteps grew closer. Evelyn didn't have time to think. She strapped herself into the seat and gripped the controls. Then, "Let's go." With a deafening roar, the ship's engines ignited, shaking the entire hangar. The canopy sealed shut, and the fighter lifted off the ground, its movements sluggish but steady. Evelyn's heart raced as the ship turned toward the hangar's exit. "Unauthorized launch detected," a voice blared over the station's intercom. "Security teams, intercept immediately." Evelyn gritted her teeth as alarms wailed. Shadow Wing's voice cut through the chaos. "Prepare for acceleration. Hold tight." Before she could respond, the ship surged forward, bursting through the hangar doors and into the star-flecked expanse beyond. The cold vacuum of space enveloped them, and for a brief, breathtaking moment, Evelyn felt the freedom she had always dreamed of. But her relief was short-lived. Red lights flashed on the console, and Shadow Wing's voice spoke again, laced with urgency. "Hostile ships inbound. Pilot, we are not alone." The stars blurred into streaks of light as Shadow Wing accelerated through the void. Evelyn gripped the controls tightly, her knuckles white against the dark surface. The fighter's cockpit was alive with sound and color, alarms blaring, lights flashing, and Shadow Wing's voice slicing through the chaos. 2 interceptors closing in. Distance, 6,000 kilometers. Weapon systems online. Evasive maneuvers advised. "I don't know how to fly this thing," Evelyn shouted, panic bubbling in her throat. She pulled the stick to the side, and the ship lurched violently, almost spinning out of control. Pilot proficiency, minimal. Calculating optimal trajectory, Shadow Wing replied, its tone maddeningly calm. The ship corrected its course, banking sharply as laser fire streaked past the canopy, illuminating Evelyn's wide eyes. She glanced at the radar, a pulsing display of red, dots converging on her position. The interceptors were gaining. Her mind raced, searching for options. Shadow Wing, can you do anything to shake them? Deploying countermeasures, the AI responded. A hatch beneath the ship opened, releasing a cluster of flares that ignited into brilliant spheres of light. The pursuing ships hesitated, their targeting systems confused by the sudden burst of heat signatures. Evelyn exhaled sharply. That bought us some time. But they're not going to stop, are they? Negative. Security protocols dictate pursuit until target is neutralized or captured. Current odds of escape, 23.7%. Well, aren't you just full of good news? She muttered, scanning the console for anything useful. Her fingers hovered over a button labeled Manual Override. She hesitated, then pressed it. A new set of controls lit up, their functions alien to her. Pilot, Shadow Wing warned. Manual control increases risk of system damage and pilot error. I don't have a choice, Evelyn snapped. If I'm going to crash and burn, I'd rather it be on my own terms. The ship bucked as she took full control. She forced her trembling hands to steady, guiding Shadow Wing into a sharp dive toward an asteroid cluster. The interceptors followed, their engines howling in the distance. Evelyn weaved through the massive rocks, the ship's hull groaning under the strain of sudden turns. Every near miss sent her heart racing. Collision warning, Shadow Wing announced as a jagged asteroid loomed ahead. I see it, Evelyn shouted, pulling the stick hard to the left. The ship skimmed past the asteroid surface, sparks flying as the wingtip grazed the rock. The interceptors weren't as lucky. One of them clipped an asteroid, its shields flaring before the entire ship disintegrated in a fiery explosion. Evelyn didn't have time to celebrate. The second interceptor was still on her tail, its weapons locked on target. Incoming missile, Shadow Wing warned. Evasive action required. Evelyn's stomach dropped as the radar displayed a missile closing in. She slammed the throttle forward, pushing the ship to its limits. The cockpit vibrated violently, and warning lights erupted across the console. Hull integrity compromised, Shadow Wing reported. Shield capacity, 15%. Not helping. Evelyn growled. She spotted a narrow crevice in a nearby asteroid and veered toward it, her hands shaking on the controls. The missile followed, its trajectory unwavering. Shadow Wing, do something, she screamed. Activating experimental systems. Hold tight. A sudden burst of energy surged through the ship, and the cockpit was bathed in a blinding white light. Evelyn's vision swam, her senses overwhelmed by a strange, otherworldly hum. When the light faded, she realized the ship had performed an impossible maneuver, twisting through the crevice at an angle no human could have calculated. The missile collided with the asteroid, detonating in a deafening explosion that rocked the surrounding debris. Evelyn gasped for air, her chest heaving. What the hell was that? Quantum phase shift, Shadow Wing replied. A high-risk maneuver utilizing advanced propulsion systems. Side effects include temporary disorientation. Yeah, no kidding, she muttered, wiping sweat from her brow. She glanced at the radar. The interceptor was gone, either destroyed in the blast or left behind in the chaos. For the first time since the chase began, there was silence. But it didn't last. A new alert flashed on the console. Evelyn frowned, her stomach sinking. What now? Unidentified vessel detected, Shadow Wing said. Signature matches high priority target. Designation, Revenant. Evelyn's blood ran cold. She had heard stories of the Revenant, a dreadnought-class warship notorious for hunting down rogue fighters. Its captain, Commander Ralvek, was a name spoken in hushed tones, a legend among the colonies for his ruthlessness. "They sent the Revenant after me," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Affirmative." Scanning for escape routes. Evelyn slumped back in her seat, her mind racing. She had no idea why the colony's security forces would go to such lengths to capture her. Was it because of shadowing, or was there something else? Something she had yet to uncover? The Revenant's shadow fell over her, its massive form blotting out the distant starlight. Evelyn felt like a mouse caught in the gaze of a predator. But even as fear threatened to consume her, a spark of defiance ignited in her chest. "Shadow Wing," she said, her voice steady despite the odds. "If we're going down, we're not going down without a fight." The AI's response was immediate, its tone resolute. "Acknowledged." Engaging combat mode. The ship's systems roared to life, and Evelyn gripped the controls, her fear giving way to determination. She didn't know what lay ahead, but she was ready to face it, to fight, to survive, and to uncover the truth behind the secrets that had drawn her into this deadly chase. The Revenant loomed closer, a colossal predator poised to strike. Its cannons bristled with energy, and Evelyn could almost feel the weight of its targeting systems locking onto Shadow Wing. The fighter's cockpit was a cacophony of alarms and flashing lights, but Evelyn's focus had narrowed to a single thought: survival. "Shadow Wing," she said, her voice tight with determination. "What are our options?" Probability of direct engagement success. For 0.1%, the AI responded. Escape options limited. High-risk maneuvers recommended. Evelyn's mind raced. The Revenant wasn't just a ship, it was a fortress. Fighting it head-on was suicide, but running wasn't much better. As she scanned the controls, her gaze fell on a flickering display labeled Neural Link Integration. Full activation. "What happens if I activate the neural link completely?" she asked. Full integration would grant enhanced piloting capabilities and direct access to experimental systems, Shadow Wing replied. "Warning: prolonged use poses significant neurological risks." Evelyn hesitated. The idea of merging her mind with the ship's AI was terrifying. She imagined her thoughts unraveling, her identity dissolving into the cold logic of the machine. But as the Revenant's weapons began to charge, she realized there was no other choice. "Do it," she said, her voice steady despite the dread creeping through her. The neural interface helmet descended, locking into place around her head with a hiss of compressed air. A wave of energy surged through her, a tidal force that blurred the boundaries between her thoughts and the ship's systems. For a moment, she was everywhere. The hum of the engines, the pulse of the shields, the targeting arrays tracking the Revenant. Shadow Wing's voice echoed in her mind, not as a separate entity, but as part of her own consciousness. Integration complete. Pilot control synchronized. The AI, her AI, announced, its tone now tinged with an almost human warmth. Evelyn's hands moved instinctively over the controls, her thoughts translating into action with a precision she'd never imagined. Shadow Wing accelerated toward the Revenant, weaving through its barrage of laser fire with impossible agility. Evelyn felt every movement, every vibration, as if the ship were an extension of her own body. The Revenant's cannons roared, and a searing beam of energy sliced through the void. Evelyn rolled the fighter sharply, the blast grazing the hull. Warnings flashed in her vision, but she pushed them aside. Her mind was already calculating her next move, her thoughts intertwining seamlessly with Shadow Wing's advanced algorithms. Shadow Wing, target their main reactor, she commanded, her voice steady despite the chaos. Reactor shielded. Direct approach unlikely to succeed, the AI responded. Alternative strategy. Disable external defenses to create an opening. Then let's make it happen, Evelyn said. The fighter darted beneath the Revenant, its sleek frame skimming the dreadnought's massive hull. Evelyn fired a volley of plasma rounds, targeting the ship's point defense turrets. Explosions rippled across the surface, sending debris spiraling into space. The Revenant's defenses faltered, and for the first time, Evelyn saw a sliver of hope. But the Revenant was far from defeated. A swarm of drones emerged from its hangars, their glowing eyes locking onto Shadow Wing. Evelyn gritted her teeth, her hands flying over the controls. The drones were fast, their coordinated attacks forcing her into a desperate dance of evasive maneuvers. Evelyn, Shadow Wing's voice echoed in her mind, energy reserves critical. We cannot sustain this engagement. Evelyn's heart sank. She had pushed the ship to its limits, and they were running out of time. Every turn, every calculated shot drained their dwindling energy reserves further. But as the drones closed in, an idea sparked in her mind. Can we overload the reactor? She asked, her voice tinged with a dangerous mix of desperation and resolve. Overloading the reactor would result in catastrophic failure, Shadow Wing replied. Survival probability, 0.3%. I'm not asking for survival, Evelyn said. I'm asking if it will take the Revenant with us. There was a pause, and for a moment, Evelyn thought the AI might refuse. But then it responded, its tone resolute. Confirmed. Reactor overload will create a chain reaction capable of destroying the Revenant. Evelyn's chest tightened. She had always dreamed of escaping the station, of finding freedom among the stars. She hadn't imagined it would end like this. But if her life could mean something, if she could save others from the shadow of the Revenant, then it was worth it. Do it, she said. Shadow Wing's systems hummed with a growing intensity as the reactor began to overload. Evelyn guided the ship into a final dive toward the Revenant's core, her mind focused and unyielding. The drones swarmed around her, their weapons tearing into the fighter's hull. But she didn't falter. Every shot, every desperate maneuver carried her closer to her goal. The Revenant's reactor came into view, a pulsing sphere of energy encased in a lattice of armored plating. Evelyn pushed the throttle to its limit, Shadow Wing hurtling toward the target. Alarms screamed in her ears, but she didn't hear them. She was already beyond fear. At a last moment, she ejected. The cockpit blasted away, launching her into the void as Shadow Wing collided with the reactor. The explosion was instantaneous, a blinding wave of light and fire that consumed the Revenant in its entirety. Evelyn's escape pod tumbled through the aftermath, the shockwave propelling her away from the destruction. The silence that followed was almost deafening. Evelyn floated in the dark, her breath ragged, her body aching. She stared at the empty space where the Revenant had been, the reality of her survival slowly sinking in. The neural link was gone, but she could still feel Shadow Wing's presence, a faint echo in the back of her mind. A beacon light blinked on her console, signaling a rescue ship approaching. Evelyn closed her eyes, exhaustion overtaking her. She had faced the impossible and won, but she knew her journey was far from over. The galaxy was vast and full of secrets, and she was determined to uncover them, not as a prisoner of fate, but as the master of her own destiny.